Welcome to the Sourcing Hero podcast, produced by Una, a group purchasing organization that empowers sourcing heroes, and Art of Procurement, the world's largest procurement podcast network. I'm your host, Kelly Barnard. The goal of the Sourcing Hero podcast is to capture the epic stories of people who are rising up and beating the odds to create exceptional value within procurement, directly from those heroes themselves. Today, my guest here on the Sourcing Hero podcast is Kris Lance. Kris is Vice President and General Manager at Una, a group purchasing organization that provides the Sourcing Hero with its home. Kris joins me every month to tackle a current news story or topic of interest from his own point of view. So, hi, Kris. Happy November, and thank you for being back on the Sourcing Hero podcast.
Yeah, happy November. October didn't take us out, so I'm here. I'm back again.
Exactly. No, it didn't take us out. That didn't end up being the surprise. Although I will say, for anybody that is listening to this episode relatively close to when it comes out, the Sourcing Hero only takes 2 weeks off a year, day before Thanksgiving and the day between Christmas and New Year's. So Kris is appearing a week earlier this month than he typically would. We hope everybody has a wonderful time if they're in the U.S. or doing Thanksgiving abroad next week. But just a couple of sort of scheduling notes there as we start to get towards the end of the year. Mm-hmm. Now, today, this is going to be very meta. So we're on a podcast, and we're going to talk about podcasts. We are fresh off the presidential election. We now know the answer to how it all turns out. But aside from talking about the candidates, the policies, the issues, what we want to actually pause today and think about were the media and communication methods that we saw be not just uniquely successful, but uniquely influential in this election cycle. And podcasting was right at the top of the list. It actually reminded me of sort of a classic quote about communications from Marshall McLuhan, who said, "The medium is the message." People might have heard that quote. The medium is the message. And in this case, the medium of podcasts very much became the message of the moment. Now, this is true of both candidates, right? We saw Donald Trump go on with Joe Rogan, some of the Barstool Sports shows. We saw Kamala Harris go on Call Her Daddy. We also saw her go on The Breakfast Club, hosted by Charlamagne the God. Maybe not traditionally a podcast, but in format, I'm going to count that as a podcast. Kris, you're both a regular podcast guest and also a listener. What are your sort of big picture reflections in terms of the role that podcasting and podcasters played in this media cycle?
Well, I mean, I don't think anybody can deny how massive of an impact that it had. And, you know, to your point, I think both candidates or both camps recognized it very, very early on. And I think that's why they had attended such a variety.
Yes.
But I think what my biggest takeaway was, I said it to myself, was they finally lost it. And when I say it, I think it's trust. I think trust is absolutely everything. And I think that the mainstream media has completely lost it. I think I read a stat where like over half of Americans, independent of, you know, party lines, are checked out from the news. And if you think about it, I mean, look at let's use Joe Rogan as an example. I mean, this is a bro who's like an MMA expert. So why are people hunkering down for a 3.5 to 4 hour, you know, podcast on what he's talking about? And I think it's very simple. It's honesty. I mean, you know, like it's not necessarily that he's just honest with the listeners. I think what people crave is he's honest with himself. Like when he's made bad calls, or maybe he's thought one way and then changed his mind. I think he's just very open to just having conversation and thinking. Contrary to, I don't remember, I think it was MSNBC, maybe CNN. It was one of the more main channels, but I'll never forget. I saw there was a news anchor. I think they were really upset. It was something going around with Elon, go figure, right? And she had she had said, it wasn't a hot mic moment, but she had said, hey, this is dangerous. He's telling people what to think. That's our job. And in that moment, I said, whoa, 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 whoa. Nope. No, it's not. Like, your job is to provide factual information, not tell
Right.
people what to think. And I guess I'll land the plane, but I think the masses, right? I think what they're doing is they're not necessarily following a team or a brand. I think they're following people who resonate on topics and perspectives that either they A, haven't considered and want to learn more, or B, align with their thoughts. And so that's the way to get the most reach. So podcasting on its face is extremely, extremely powerful if done correctly. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And it's funny because I sort of consumed all of this content from two different perspectives. Obviously, I wanted to be as informed as humanly possible. But it was also interesting to watch some of these conversations as someone selfishly who interviews people for a living. I view almost everything I do as interviewing people, whether it's formally recording episodes of The Sourcing Hero or even pre-interviewing people for Art of Procurement, for Art of Supply, for webinars that we're hosting, interviewing people to get the content for white papers. And one of the things that I was struck by, and I'll use Joe Rogan and Charlemagne the God as sort of my two examples. I'm sure there are plenty of others, but I noticed it very predominantly in both of them. I think the thing they both do best is a ton of prep. I mean, there's not necessarily evidence of it physically. It's not like they're sitting there with binders, but you can tell the prep that goes into these shows is gargantuan. But then they get to the conversation and they don't become the story. I mean, if you were to look at the relative word count or the time spent sort of holding the floor in any of those conversations, I think, as I finish a long thought here, the host does a good job in both cases, making sure the spotlight stays on the guest. And I think their ability to listen and to know what questions to ask just to get the person going, I think that plays an enormous role in people's ability to then learn from the content that results from those shows. It was a really, just to me, a fascinating sort of cycle and opportunity to watch the very best people that do this for a living at their finest in this incredibly important moment.
Yeah, it's a really good point, because they're like, I think of like one of my favorites to watch is like Sean Ryan, but like I think what makes some of these podcasts so incredible is they'll ask the questions that maybe people are afraid to ask, but everybody's thinking. But I think you nailed it. The most important part is they shut up and listen. Like they let the people talk. They let whether it's a story, whether it's an event, they just let the person answer the question rather than steering the answer of the question. I think you're absolutely right.
Now, when we think about maybe why podcasting became sort of the medium of the moment, can you generalize? Do you think it tells us something about where we are as a country, or is that too much to try to draw from simply podcasts being popular right now?
I mean, I think you could make healthy assumptions. Like for me, on its face, it's like I had said, I'm making an assumption when I say, well, people don't trust the to trust the news.
Right.
Maybe I'm projecting. Maybe that's my own maybe opinion. But I think there's a good bit of that there. Something else that I think, and this is just my opinion, but what I think it shows is about the country is that people are hungry, and not for just the truth, but to learn. Like
Yeah.
people are open to like different perspectives, at least in my perspective, at least in my experience. The majority of the interactions that I have when they're competing views, if it's competing views from podcasts versus competing views from, let's say, mainstream sources, those conversations are dramatically different as far as just how open is the mind. And I'm not inadvertently trying to be disparaging here. For those who do still watch the mainstream news, I'm just saying that I believe that what it's showing me is that people are open to different perspectives. People are open to different things, and they're craving it. And I think that's why there's so many variety of different podcasts that are still that are still growing, and getting more viewers or listeners.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I think so too. And I also think, and it's funny because if I had $1 for every time I've said this over the last 10 years, I could take like a whole day off. But I'm always prepping people to come, excuse me, and be part of a podcast conversation. And I say to them, I will take notes and I will send you thoughts in a narrative, and please review it. And then please, please, please throw it away and don't ever look at it again. Please do not jot down your notes. Please do not put Post-it notes around your laptop screen or on the wall in front of you. I think the expectation with the podcast format is that it's a little bit more raw, it's a little bit more authentic. And I think people can hear that. I think that comes through. And I think there's a trust, to your earlier point, that goes along with that, that people would rather, I don't know, have it less edited, maybe a little bit less polished, a little bit less formal, but then you get to use your own instincts about, is this person speaking from experience, speaking from the heart, saying something they truly believe in, even if maybe the eloquence isn't quite there because you're speaking off the cuff, you're responding to things in real time. I think there is something innately human about being able to sense whether or not someone is being truthful and forthright. And I guess to me personally, that is part of the power of the podcast format, is that it breaks that sort of like cover gloss. It breaks that down, but it gives people the opportunity to decide for themselves in a more close-up format. Do I believe what this person is telling me?
Yes, absolutely. You freaking nailed it. It's like, it's the, if I had to put it in one word, it's the authenticity. Like
Yeah.
how genuine is this conversation? But then I think you're right. It's not even that people can hear it. You can feel it. You can feel it
Yes.
in the conversation. Like, is this person really even passionate about this? Like, why are they, I think you're absolutely right.
Now, when we think about the experience that we've had, so I actually went back and double checked because I'm not great at keeping track of these kinds of things. So how long have you and I been doing this show every single month? We're at 2.5 years.
Wow.
So that's actually a pretty long time to do something month in and month out without fail. I'm curious, and I'll tell you right up front, Kris, you can be totally honest. My feelings can take it.
Okay.
What has your experience been, or what do you feel like you've learned about the podcasting format over those 2.5 years of monthly recorded conversations?
Well, the first thing, my knee-jerk reaction is just like, it's not near as serious as I thought it was, right? Like, it's not, if something just goes wrong or you misspeak, like, it really isn't the end of the world. Like,
Yeah.
it'll be okay. That's one thing. And then what I've also learned is actually more people are likely to agree with you than disagree with you, at least in my case. And I think that's been a great experience, because that is why, like my infamous do not say list, why I have though been able to whittle it down, is because, a lot of the things that I perceive to be untouchable, people, like, they have been reaching out to me saying, do not stop, keep
Yeah.
up on these topics, because nobody else was really touching it. So I would say those are the two main things. If I want to be a little cheeky, what I'll say is I did learn pretty quickly when we started touching on some of the hotter topics, how much control of the narrative that the mainstream media really did have. And for an example, right, like there were instances where maybe I'll share very, very raw facts about something, days, weeks, months before. And then whether it was a candidate or whether it was a camp or whether it was a specific source, they would then comment on it after the fact. And then somehow I was regrouped back into this bucket.
Oh,
And
interesting.
yeah, and I thought that was just interesting. It's like, so, hey, hang on a second. Like, how am I pro Harris or how am I pro Trump because I said X? I said
Right.
that 2 weeks before anything was even talked about. So
Yeah.
that's, if I'm being kind of edgy, that's kind of how I felt on some things. But for the most part, it was I wish more people would do podcasts, because I think typically like the quieter people have some of the most brilliant ideas. And so I would say that would be my main two things. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, clearly, you and I both spend lots of time working on podcasts, but
Mhm.
also, if we're like most other people, listen to them. Now, you mentioned, I think it was, did you say Sean Ryan?
I did.
Is that who you mentioned earlier?
Mhm.
Do you have any other favorite podcasts? And whether that's directly relevant to your job at Una, or whether it's, we know you're into fitness because you've talked about it. Are there any specific shows or hosts or formats that you particularly like?
Yeah, there are actually. So the Sean Ryan show is one. And the reason I brought that up, or why I'll say I recommend it. I think I put it in a newsletter. It's just absolutely incredible facts, but he brings on like the who's who of experts, and he does an incredible job of just letting them talk. So I love that show. I'll share this one, it's a group of, I'll call kind of like Alex Jones type characters, but they're not maybe that extreme. They're just former experts in their field who are extremely contrarian, and
Okay.
a group of doctors, lawyers, all teachers, very well established, or I'll say tenured.
Mm.
But the name of the podcast is called The Union of the Unwanted. Now, if anybody goes and listens to any of those episodes, like, please know, like I am saying right now, like some of those topics are just way, way out there, like pretty wild. And so it's a good way for me to plug in on, what if, but also have a little bit of fun on just things that maybe are not even close to the realm of possibility. The third one I would say that I would recommend from like a fitness business mindset, like if maybe I'm feeling down or if I need good quotes or something like that, I really like Modern Wisdom with Chris Williamson.
Okay.
I think it's been really helpful for me, specifically on some of the topics they're touching on around like self-reflection, and like the difference between motivation and just, essentially just being ready every day to take on the day. But just really cool different perspectives. Those are the three main that I listen to from like a real formal podcast perspective.
One thing I just want to sort of circle back and ask, and then I have a couple of recommendations to
Yeah,
make
really.
too.
Yeah.
You were talking about, was it the Union of the Unwanted?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So are you saying, just to clarify,
Mm-hmm.
that you listen to the show,
Mm-hmm.
but you don't automatically agree with everything that you're hearing?
Exactly. It's
Just getting this on the record. So what you're saying is it's okay to listen to people that you disagree with sometimes, disagree with all the time,
Mhm.
think might potentially be crazy, but you listen to them because of the thoughts that they spark?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you absolutely nailed it. In fact, there's the Union of the Unwanted. I think the last episode I listened to, I think it was like 3 or 4 ago. It was the first time that I had listened in, and they actually had like a lot. They let it go, but an internal, like a pretty big, massive disagreement. And
Wow.
I think that I don't remember what the topic was supposed to be, but it ended up being, does voting matter?
Oh,
And
interesting.
it got very intense, because everybody was pulling out facts and receipts and going back to things that I'm like, I haven't even heard of this. But yeah, for me, I see what you're getting at there. And I wish more people would do that, because to me, that how do you learn? One of my biggest fears, and why I do seek out, like I still do watch mainstream media from
Mhm.
time to time. I just throttle how much I'm pouring myself into it. But I mean, you almost have to. How could you possibly learn if you're just sitting in an echo chamber? I want
Right.
something that's going to challenge. Like if I am truly believe in something, I should be able to have any sort of conversation on it. And one of my concerns is I don't want to be so blind of my convictions that I'm like walking off a cliff and people are trying to tell me stop. So
Right.
I always want to pour in and really have those conversations. So yeah.
Well, I do think one of the other things that's nice about the format is, yes, we want to learn. Yes, we want to be challenged to think new things. But there's also definitely an entertainment
Mhm.
quality to podcasts that I appreciate.
Yeah. Well,
When I look at, and I actually took a quick scroll through my library, like, okay, where do I go the most often?
mhm.
Um, One series now, the Sourcing Hero is weekly, sort of the traditional, regularly scheduled podcast. But some podcast series are like, hey, we're going to do X episodes and that's the show. And then it's done. A couple in that area that I definitely recommend. One is a show called Dirty Rats by a guy named Howie Carr. It's actually, if you know me, you know I'm from Boston.
Right.
It's all about the Winter Hill Gang, Whitey Bulger, all them back in the Boston mob days. Not a family listen. If you're writing this down and looking for like family road trip podcasts, not that one. Listen to that grown-ups only on your own time, but absolutely fantastic. Almost in the spirit of the old time radio shows where there'd be like background sounds and effects mixed in. So really cool, entertaining listening. Another series that kind of starts and ends. I think there's 10 episodes to it. I will admit, I have listened to it like 5 times. It's called Uncanceled History, and it's from Douglas Murray. And it's sort of like you have your do not say list. This is the 10 most likely to be canceled major historical figures list. So it's everybody from Robert E. Lee to Teddy Roosevelt, but it also includes the classics. They take on colonialism. Just really fascinating conversations with absolute experts that both recognize the historical importance of these people and these times, and also are willing to be critical of them. It's definitely not sort of a full-throated defense of any of these people. And then the last show, which is more traditional in the sense of podcasts, is The Rest is History. It sprung up during the pandemic. It's very regularly, almost daily. It's like 3-4 times a week. And it is ongoing forever-ish, but it's in like blasts. Like there'd be 5 episodes about the French Revolution and then 4 or 5 episodes about like the US in 1968. So all different times in history, people jumping around hitting on.
Yeah. And the second one real quick, you said it was Uncanceled History?
Uncanceled History.
Yeah, I'm writing that one down. That sounds interesting. I'll have to check that out.
It's amazing. It's absolutely amazing. And what you learn about each of these times or people, the one on the classics is my absolute favorite. But just even if you're not necessarily interested in like, how much do I really need to know about Aristotle? The thought process that these modern people apply to what is both significant and problematic about these historical figures, it's a free lesson in critical thought. It's just amazing. It's an amazing show. If anybody listens to any of these shows that Kris and I have been talking about and has pros and cons, you'll have to let us know. Or if you have your own favorite, right?
Yeah, please.
Reach out. Let us know what your favorites are. And of course, Kris.
Yes.
Are both of our absolute favorite podcast, The Sourcing Hero.
Oh, you got to listen. Oh,
right?
Like and subscribe.
Now, one of the things that is so fun about The Sourcing Hero is not just hosting it. I love hosting it. Not just having you on every month. Love having you on every month. But it's very unique in that we are oftentimes hosting people for their very first podcast conversation ever. And there have been times where I've had to like give people a little bit of a coach or give people a little bit of a confidence boost because they say, okay, this is a bit outside my comfort zone, but you know, everybody else is doing it. So I feel like I should do it. And then the moment comes to record and I think the panic sets in and it's like, no, it's okay. Right.
Yep.
Let's just you and I talking, right? No big deal. Don't worry about it. And I know a certain somebody that might be my guest this week who needed a little bit of time to warm up to the idea of having to do a podcast. So I thought you might be a good person to ask if somebody is thinking about dipping their toe in and doing their first podcast episode where somebody invites them on, they go through a process, they're there as the guest. What advice would you offer about whether it's being comfortable, deciding what to talk about, just knowing what to expect going in? Would you encourage somebody to take that first step?
Yes, I would encourage people to take that first step, especially if you don't want to do it. If you don't want to do it, that's even more of a reason to do it. There's a whole mindset thing behind that anyway. But my advice would probably be, and I recognize I'm saying this to myself, and what I probably would have rolled my eyes if someone said this, but it's as simple as like stop worrying about other people and their thoughts, right? Kind of like what we've just covered today.
Yeah.
Like people want the authenticity. I think some of my concerns was like, man, everyone's gonna listen to this and pick apart. I said something wrong, or I took something out of context, or I didn't quote something correctly, and it's like, if you really think about it, like nobody really cares about that. What they care about is just the actual information. So my advice is, if you're going to do it, but jump in with both feet,
Yeah.
and just stay true to yourself, and then be honest with yourself, right? Like stay in your lane. If you don't know, say, I don't know. There's nothing to earn more respect than that, right? So that's what I would say. But the authenticity, people are going to be able to tell. So if you're nervous, yeah, people might be able to tell, but that's okay.
That's right. It's real.
It is. And that's what they want. So that's what I think. And then I would also encourage people to just, again, really lean into like the realness. Don't try and put up a bravado or be something that you're not, because the vast majority of the people listening, they're not billionaires or even millionaires. And so don't try to come off as that. Don't worry about the imposter syndrome. Just say what you have to say, especially if it's an opinion based. And if it's a factual conversation, just make sure you have your receipts. And if your receipts are wrong, you can always point to them. So I guess I would just say is like, don't overthink it. Because if there's anybody who overthinks, it's me. And I overthought it. And we probably should have been, instead of 2.5 years, Kelly, we probably should have been doing it for 3. But yeah, that would be my advice. Like it's not as serious as you're making it out to be in your mind.
Absolutely. And it's meant to be fun.
Right. Exactly.
It's meant to be an enjoyable conversation, which it always is when you're here every month. Now, if people have had the good fortune to find this for the very first time and are just meeting you through this conversation, what would you recommend in terms of them either learning more about Una or reaching out to get in touch with you directly?
Yeah. So if it's about me, you want to know, the only social media I have is on LinkedIn. So it's Kris with a K, Lance. There's not a lot of us out there, so you can find me. To find more about Una and like why we even have a podcast and what is it you do here, just go to una.com, UNA.com. You can see all the fantastic people here. You can see actually what we're trying to do and why it's called the Sourcing Hero. Go check it out. Other than that, you could just send me a quick email. It's Kris, Kris @una.com.
Well, Kris, as always, fantastic conversation. Thank you so much for being here.
Happy to be here.
And of course, happy Thanksgiving to everybody listening in, whether you're in the US or not, whether you celebrate it or not. We are grateful for you as listeners. Yes. Thank you so much for spending some time with us. And we will see you, in air quotes, again, first Wednesday in December. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Sourcing Hero podcast. Join us again next time for more true stories of sourcing and business heroism performed by your colleagues and peers. Look for the Sourcing Hero wherever you get your podcasts, and don't forget to subscribe. Finally, don't forget, sourcing heroism is taking place all around us every day. Keep your eyes open and you're bound to see it. Until next time, I'm your host, Kelly Barner. Stay well, and always remember that you can be a hero too.